We're here to introduce a new initiative as part of the DevOps Automation SIG. It's the SDLC Common Controls Initiative, focusing on a common SDLC controls catalog between financial institutions. And we'll go into more detail on that in a minute. I'm Aaron. I work in a controls engineering function, shall we say, for the last 7 years at Morgan Stanley. And Toby, well, introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm Toby. I work for Deutsche Bank. Similar to Aaron, we're in the sort of governance space, the control space in and around sort of software delivery lifecycle.
And before we move on, I just want to thank everyone that was at the workshop this morning. I think we had 15 people there, so thank you if you're here, if you made it back. Thank you for coming. Okay, so the topics we're going to cover quickly, we're going to look at what are SDLC controls, so very basic. Hopefully everyone in this room should already know that, but just a quick recap in case. Why do we need them? Maybe we don't. Maybe we can get rid of them all. Sadly not. How are they established and created? The problem we've identified as part of the DevOps SIG, and the solution. Okay, all right. So what are the controls? At a very high level, simplistically speaking, they are policy and procedures that we all follow to protect ourselves and our respective institutions, right? And in the SDLC space, they are focusing on software artifacts and ensuring or demonstrating that those software artifacts are secure, reliable, and compliant by showing that we can mitigate particular risks. That's pretty high level. Anything you'd like to add, Toby, to the...
Perhaps just to make sure we've really set the scene. We're both from financial institutions, like you are. The types of risks we're concerned about and the scope of this project is very much around software delivery, the software supply chain, SDLC, and not some of the other conventional risk types that you probably know and love.
All right, yes. So the perception of controls is obviously, if you're the average developer, like I try to be, is often negative. They're the toll gate, they're the tax we have to pay, but underneath them are risks that we are protecting ourselves from. Okay, so the humble pull request, branch protection. Tell us all about it.
This is an example we're going to try and carry through the presentation a little bit, but you may or may not have this kind of control in your organization, but we've seen it across several. Something quite innocuous, you must have pull requests or branch protection in place, and often developers, organizations just accept that. That's a constraint we work with. But we're really interested in trying to understand why that's there and the risks it's trying to mitigate. It's interesting if you think there's an approval button associated with this, and people are approving a request to merge two branches of a tree, combine them for the first time. But what do they actually think they're approving? There's a sort of inference there that they're making. So we were talking earlier, and the security expert might be looking out for SQL injection or other kind of security-focused things with the code, so they want to make sure those things aren't there. They feel protective of their domain. But another person, let's say a senior engineer working with an early careers person, might be more interested in a teaching opportunity. And so they might have some sort of interaction and approve when the two of them, three of them have agreed. So, I mean, we talked through some other examples, but...
Yeah, I mean, if you were to try and close your eyes and define the policy behind having to require a pull request and a review, what would that be? Who would those people be? Who are you as the approver? What rank are you? What role do you inhabit? Are you an architect? Are you a security SME? Are you a peer? Are you a developer just looking at quality? It's kind of endless. And the risks that you're trying to mitigate with that one simple control are numerous. And in order to try and write the policy, you have to enumerate them. You have to call them out, and you have to call out, could they be handled in a different way? Could they be handled earlier in the pipeline, something without the manual toil maybe, or maybe you need multiple approvals, or maybe none at all, depending on the scenario. So let's quickly move on. We'll go revisit this one, and we'll try and have a go at defining it. So we mentioned that controls are being put in place to mitigate risks. What kind of risks are we talking about? This is by no means a complete list. I've listed out some individual groups, some stakeholders, but we've got here operational risk. So is the software something that is sustainable? Are we using too much resources? Are we going to burn out through our budget? Is it reliable? You know, are the deployment's reliable? Is the software itself reproducible? Is it constantly brittle? Does it do what the user intended often enough to meet your requirements? Then there's security. Security. We all know about the importance of security. Is it safe? Is the software artifact we're going to deploy safe? How can we evidence that? How is the control ensuring that? And then we've got some more, and there's a length here. I'll quickly just run through the ones on the right-hand side. Quality is one that we sometimes don't quite know how to define, but does the software do the thing we asked it to do? Does it meet the user's requirements? Is it even materially useful? If we release it and it doesn't, is it a reputational impact? And then finally, my favorite is not my favorite, the one that I spend a lot of time on is the regulatory risk. So the regulations are there for their own reasons. They have risks that they're trying to mitigate, but also being out of compliance to the rules, regulation, and laws are their own risk for firms, right? There's impact from that, financial and otherwise. So, and not just the software itself. Does the software act and behave in the market the way that it's supposed to, but also the release pipeline itself has its own sets of regulations. Anything you'd like to add, Toby, to the list?
Yeah, thank you. I'd sort of add that really this stuff is complex. We have lots of different roles, lots of sort of categories, and these individuals are concerned with different things and approach this with their own perceptions, their own lenses, and we have to find a way to talk together to cross that kind of barrier in where we're starting from. We're all trying to achieve the same thing, protect you know, our individual organizations, but the way that compliance officers might look to a problem or talk about a problem the way developers will, there's often quite a lot of tension in that. And so, yeah, the takeaway here, I think, really is it's complex. It's a lot of people problems, cultural problems, and we haven't even got to the good stuff yet. So you'll hopefully see that as we...
And it's worth pointing out that a given control can span multiple risks, like we mentioned with the branch protection rule. Obviously, that's going to cover multiple risks. Have you annotated which risks it covers, and especially if you move that control point or you do it in a different way? Okay, so let's quickly move on. So how do we create the controls in the first place? Do the controls have a life cycle? Well, they're just like software, really. They have a development life cycle. They're created, they're worked on, and then they run, and then it continues forever. So how are they created? Well, obviously, there's potential for an event or an observation, an investigation, a new industry framework to learn from, a new law of the land, a new regulation. Even if you have the luxury of being told or instructed as part of regulation, you still have to interpret it. And we'll cover in the next slide a little bit of interpretation, but you have to interpret it and then eventually implement it. And then finally, at the bottom of that workflow is the operation, and that's probably the time I spend most of my efforts on. Once the control is there in place, if it requires constant maintenance, monitoring, observation, evidencing, exams, review, sampling, that process itself is probably several orders of magnitude more than the cost to get the control defined in the first place. And because of that, it's important what you did leading up to it, because you're going to have to be, or we are going to have to be, or your organization, evidencing that and maintaining it off into the future. And so I've listed down on the right-hand side some of the people like myself and Toby involved with the green bit, I think, would that be right?
Yep.
As controls platform owners. But there are many more people. This is just an example of sets of people. You've obviously got the developers who are going to be impacted, who will face the toll gate and have to provide the evidence or work in a particular way. You've got the policymakers, security, various forms of security involved, compliance themselves, making sure you adhere to the rules, and my favorite at the bottom, the auditors and regulators, which have their own views on how things should be done as well. But there are many more. These are just a sample set.
There's a great point on here as well. The slide kind of captures quite nicely because the two sides are intimately linked, that not every role on the right-hand side is always involved in the process on the left-hand side.
But they should be.
They should be. And to reiterate the point we made earlier, if we don't find ways for these roles to talk up and down that chain, we get effectively poor quality controls that don't actually protect us, but seem like they do when you look at it through one lens. So, the project we're talking about today is a lot about standardization and ubiquitous language, taxonomy. You're going to use these words a lot, but really having a common way for these different roles, and this isn't an exhaustive list, to communicate gets us better results, gets us more effective controls.
You make a good point about the number of people involved and making sure they're involved on the left-hand side, because developers are often missed out. They just get told, here you go, comply with it, but they've not been consulted on their productivity impact, velocity impact of having this new requirement for every release or every change or even periodic processes. So it's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, it's the SMEs that have the intimate knowledge. Engineers know where the risks are, and the policymakers, without empathy for the engineering, can't define good policies, and the engineers can't advocate for the gaps if they don't understand the policies. So, to reiterate the point, we've all got to advocate and inquire. So
what we're trying to articulate here is it's not just that button you see in GitHub, approve the pull request. There's a whole journey to get there. A huge amount of people, probably, depending on the size of the organization, you could be looking at 20, 30 people involved in the creation of a control. And then similarly, a set of people that would be involved in that control for its entire lifetime, and they have very, very, very long lifetimes. People do not delete controls. They stay around more or less forever. So even though we put up on the screen a very simple control, very easy to implement, you go into your repo settings, you hit branch protection, there's more to it than that. There's a whole journey. Right, let's move on. Oh, wrong way. Here we go.
So the complexity we saw in the earlier slide is, if that's not difficult enough, when you look at it for multiple organizations, we're all trying to achieve the same thing, going through the same steps. We may get different answers to the same questions. We may get different questions from the same auditors or the same regulators. So, that's the problem we're trying to solve, really. How do we answer these questions once in a consistent way to a standard that's accepted, so that roles like Aaron's and myself, we spend less time explaining ourselves and more to auditors, to interested parties, and more time focusing on effective controls. And we haven't really mentioned it, but when you get the controls wrong, and when controls are either not effective or they introduce toil, that's obviously introducing waste into the system, slowing everybody down. So there's a efficiency sort of aspect, but there's also a opportunity aspect, I suppose, that if you get it wrong, you're handicapping yourself in your ability to deliver quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're multiplying this same amount of toil, or potentially variable amount of toil, because each company is a slightly different size and shape, across multiple institutions. Those are supposed to be buildings, in case. But one thing I realized I made a mistake when I made the slide. It's the same set of people in those buildings. But actually, from discussion during the earlier workshops, it's not the same people. People have different roles. What I call a controls platform engineer, which is a term I've made up, I think, I'm not sure, is completely different in Toby's organization and the other organizations we've spoken to. Some areas will carve out some of the controls to be dedicated to a security team and not part of the SDLC. Some will fold in change management to SDLC. Some will keep it apart. So it's actually completely different often between the organizations. And this multiplication effect and different groups leads to a huge amount of fragmentation. We're going to move on to the next slide, but which will highlight one example of that discussion.
So this is us revisiting that simple pull request control, and this is the outcome of some conversations we had in our early working group sessions. And we were talking about the need for, or why we do pull requests, like for enforced pull requests. And we kept using what we thought was the same words, but in a different way. So we were talking formally about code review, peer review, or sometimes never alone. And we realized very quickly that we're trying to address different risks with the same kind of control point, that same mechanism around pull request. So one of them, for example, was code review, where we were kind of interested in the quality of the code. So maybe from a security lens or from a sort of house style lens. And at the other end of the slide, we were talking a lot about never alone, which was much more about identifying insider threats. So the idea that a developer should not be able to unilaterally make a change, apply it to production without some checks and balances. So two reasonably well articulated risks that may be met by or mitigated by using the pull request mechanism. But we kind of struggle with peer review, and some people think of the control as peer review, but what is that trying to protect? Is it some sort of practice advocacy like quality, or is it something more concrete? And really, Aaron will build on this, I'm sure, but really it's, again, another example where it's a little bit complex. We can't create an effective control unless we articulate the risks. And surprisingly, to our, well, maybe not to our surprise, but in the institutions we've worked with, very few people are able to articulate the risks. So you have that problem of just habitual behaviours. We've had this control for years. Everybody does that. Yeah, we know it takes 2 days to complete, but why would we change it? So I think we've got an opportunity. We're challenging in our own organisations about how to revisit that, re-question it.
And of course, if there is no risk, the control should go. Otherwise, It's not providing any value. Just touching on this example. So this was a sort of real example from the workshop. And it was interesting because the purpose of the workshop was to establish, do we have a problem? Or maybe we're all in sync. So does it matter? If we're all in sync, it's fine. Let's move on. Let's not start this initiative. And from the discussions, we realized we were talking over each other. We were quite confused about what we each meant when we were saying simple words like control, like review, like peer review. And so I put these three up on the screen, but you can kind of see, as Toby said, the one on the far left, quality, code review, it clearly maps to quality as a risk that it's mitigating. And on the right, never alone, having an extra person checking somewhere in the pipeline does tackle insider threat as a risk. But the one in the middle is confusing, frankly. I don't know what it would be tied to. It's a sort of weaker definition that we were using in discussion. And it sort of highlighted to us that even though we think we are doing the same job, in theory, we've somehow come to different answers and different terminology over time. And so it would be fantastic if we did something about that. And so here comes the solution. So the solution for us, we think, following in the footsteps of CCC and AIGF, coming up with a common language, a taxonomy, to describe the problem and describe the controls and describe the risks and those mitigations, put them into a catalogue. So key to that is we will probably never get all of the organizations onto one policy. I think that would be too ambitious for anyone, really, especially as companies and institutions come in different sizes, they have different markets. But a catalogue gives us the ability to pick and choose. So you might say, look, we've got this internal definition for code review or an associated sort of quality control. Let's take the language from off the shelf. Let's change it a little bit. Let's reference the same language. And then all the vendors, regulators, auditors, external and internal can all use the same language that we've got on the catalogue. And hopefully that'll drive down the duplication, drive down the risk, and hopefully make for a safer environment as well, because each of these have been well tested at every organization rather than tested in different ways.
Yeah, just to maybe expand on that a little bit, I think this can give us as an industry an opportunity to use the consistent language, and that's important when I'm talking to the regulators or to audit, and trying to convince them based on engineering practice why something is not a problem. It's very much my experience and my advocacy versus the auditors. And when they've seen a lot of dysfunction and a lot of other organizations come to ours, see the same dysfunction, they're kind of skeptical, rightly so, because I'm not motivated by the same things they are, perhaps in their perception. But to have that kind of gravitas about an industry recognized sort of body of work describing very clearly in a structured way where the risks are, how to mitigate them, cross-reference to other frameworks, NIST, SALSA, other things like this that we can leverage. It just builds this sort of compelling story. So, the goal is auditors come to us in the future asking, have you met Control 673 in the Common Controls Catalogue by FINOS? And that would be great, because we could say, yes, we have, thank you very much. And you should be able to do the same. So yeah.
And we've seen similar things work in the past, right? We are both with our platforms examined or queried regularly. And if you can point to something, maybe even a vendor product that is familiar, then it's a much simpler process. So if you explain, how do you do version control? And you say, I use Git, they're like, yes, I've seen that before. Hold on, let me check my notes. Excellent, done. If you say, I've invented my own version control, well done, but now you've got to sit down and have that picked apart. And maybe you've done a good job, well done, but you're going to have to pay for that in evidencing every single piece of it. And maybe you haven't done a good job, and then you've got a finding. So this is taking that out of into the policy language itself, and crafting that language is not for the faint of heart. It's like writing code, but without any of the tools that we're used to. It's English. And you can lead yourself into traps. You can lead yourself into scenarios that are not possible to achieve or evidence. And so getting a group of people together as part of FINOS so that we can hammer those out, describe what's worked for ourselves, and come to a common set of controls, I think would be advantageous. So.
Yeah, imagine, you mentioned vendors and I guess platforms. Imagine if we can certify those platforms. So instead of looking at every individual project that goes across some of my platforms, Audit would audit a platform, issue the sort of standard, and then everybody's free to just, we've got the trust in the platforms, and we don't have to re-establish trust in every single tenant or client of that platform.
That is a good point. We talked a little bit about auditors being able to see the same language, but also vendors as well. So when they're trying to roll out or implement controls evidencing, for example, they would have a set that they could look at how to implement the kinds of things we're looking for before they come to us. Or they can come to us and say, look, we've implemented them all, would you like to buy it? That would be fantastic.
It's a common language of confidence, I think, that every stakeholder in our organization, from developers, compliance folks, and everywhere in between, have some confidence. And it's not just my word for it, it's the weight of FINOS and industry behind it.
Okay, so the final slide. Come join us. So we had a wonderful workshop this morning, a good number of attendees, I think 15 or so from different institutions. We're looking for others to join us as well. So I've put the link up there to our regular meeting once every 2 weeks on a Monday, but we're looking for anyone really. So particularly of interest, I'm looking for people that are involved in governance, policy makers, procedure experts, but it doesn't have to be limited to there. If you're a developer and impacted by controls, it's worth you getting involved as well, because like I said, they're often not involved from the beginning when it comes to policies, and I think they should be as a developer, as a pretend developer. I would also like to get an auditor involved as well, if there's anyone from that side, anyone interested, because the language has got to be good. The language has got to be safe. It's got to be something that's robust and something we can evidence in the future. So we're very keen to get a mixture of backgrounds involved in the program. So please come join us.
Perhaps I'll close then by thanking you. If any of the issues discussed today affect you, please come and join the support group, where we can hopefully make things better. But thank you very much. If there's any questions or if we have time, or you want to discuss anything, please come find us.
Yeah, I was just going to say that hopefully we've given you, if you don't work on the controls and policy side, some idea of what happens on that side. They're not just the toll gate that you see or the button press. There's a huge amount of work beyond just the inconvenience you might face. So please come help us out. Oh. You have a question.
One question. How much buy-in do you have currently? How many people, like how many companies have shown interest in it? And the second thing, do you have some control that you can show us and say, this is what we have currently?
It's a great question. So the question was, how much buy-in do we have already? The answer is Toby, myself, and we've got Mike from Kosli. We've got a handful of others. I think a representative from JFrog and GitLabs as well. And we had a number of people this morning show some interest. So in terms of buy-in, we're looking for some more financial institutions, really, to sort of round out the group. In terms of progress, almost none. We're just starting out. We've had 3 workshops. We've tried to work out if this is a problem. We've agreed it's a problem. And we've starting to work on the first handful of controls. So we're looking at binary provenance and I'm going to say peer review, knowing full well I already just said peer review is the wrong thing. Taking peer review and working out what we really mean and breaking that up into individual controls and risks. So that's where we are, right at the beginning. Good time to start. Oh, Dan?
Congratulations, this is great. I'm just seeing this as a potential future into contributing to SBOM, the SBOM software. Yeah, because you have the sort of the dependencies in the SBOM that currently exist, and whatever you guys are going to be adding, it's going to enhance the SBOM, it's going to get more great.
So you're thinking you can self-sign your SBOMs with the controls you're meeting? Yeah, yeah.
Certainly, SBOMs will play. So the question was, it's more of a statement. This could play into the SBOMs. Certainly, some of the controls will involve the SBOMs, and you could also store the evidence in them. But there's a whole discussion there.
Sounds like you should come and...
You could come join us, have that discussion. Any other questions from... There's good questions. Oh, there we go. Gentleman in the middle.
Since this also checks for the roles, is there any plans to combine this with tools like Git proxy, where you have basically the same
Oh, that's good.
reference implementation of that nice tool?
Well, if I may, that's complicated. So I don't think this is about proposing tooling, or it's about describing the risks and how to mitigate them, probably in the language of patterns. So we've described a couple informally, but we want to describe that much more formally, and then it becomes easier for tools, platforms to implement those patterns. And then you've got lots of debates there, whether you try and do that on the periphery, you try and centralize it. We're not here to solve that, but we do have and would enjoy more people contributing to those debates, because that's the other side of our day job, perhaps some of your day job.
I'll just repeat the question. The gentleman said, could this integrate with Git proxy and basically a sort of policy-based approach? And certainly, some of the controls will be about that. Ingress controls, what you can push or what you can pull, and evidencing from a gate like that is absolutely potential for being a pattern that sort of links into one of the controls, which in turn links into the risks. So I think, absolutely. I think we did talk about should we provide reference implementations, and we haven't worked out if we will, but we think it could be useful because it helps tell the story. We obviously can't list all the implementations of a given control because it's unbounded, but certainly. It's a good question, though. Oh, another one?
What do you think is missing from existing SDLC security frameworks and control catalogs? So what's the main drive? Not the answer from this morning, but maybe it's useful for you.
That's a really difficult one. Can you remember the answer I gave this morning? So the question was, what's missing from existing industry standards around security? Because obviously we've got NIST and I can never say that one. But anyway, various other standards. You've also got SALSA, which I think you mentioned this morning. I think what we found out when we were looking is they are quite narrow in the sense that they're trying to focus on a particular area. Software supply chain for SALSA, where it had a broader remit in the beginning, I think, and then it narrowed down. SDLC is really broad, really, really broad, and we need to sort of put everything under one house. But where those frameworks do come in is for defining lineage, control lineage. Because one thing I think we missed from the talk is when you define controls, it is ideally important to link to where they came from. Why did you do them? And if it was from an upstream framework or an upstream law, you should include that lineage. Because if those disappear or change, your implementation should change, or maybe you drop it altogether, or maybe you've got something that applies on top. So I think they're definitely huge sources of material. And when it comes to the security areas, I'm hoping we have an easier time because there's a lot more reference material. I suspect we'll probably have even more of a difficult time. I think one of the ones that came up in the workshop were 2 regulations that were contradicted each other from 2 different regulators. So you're like, okay, maybe having that reference material is not going to make our life easier. It's going to make it more difficult. Right? We're going to have to square the circle. But it's a very good point. It's a good question.
Oh, I would add before, if you don't mind, I don't think it's about security. Security is one narrow slice, as Aaron said. And the observation we made was, you know, I've talked about it before, but with AI and cloud, there's a huge kind of commercial industry energy behind it. And so we have the FINOS CCC and the AI governance framework. But we've, as an industry, sort of neglected the foundations here, the simple risks we introduce when we write code. They might be security, but they might be, and are, many, many other things. So we want to approach it from a very holistic, you know, traditional sort of SDLC practice.
I think the gentleman here's got a question, or?
It might be interesting to have a way of describing the specific implementations of a control, right? So you may have a control that has nuances to say, well, in this case, if it's mainframe code, it's distributed code, it's cloud-based, you may have nuances of the control that say, well, it looks a little bit differently this way. The control is there, but it has nuances.
Yeah.
If there's a way of describing those nuances in a way that you can introspect it and actually say, well, we have these controls and this feeds in. So there's an interdependency on, say, processes that you have. You might be able to have a layer to say, let's look at it systematically here, looking at the technical description, so a sort of a meta language that describes the controls that you can start to use to analyze the gaps and also analyze where you see the connection. Sometimes you have a well-integrated control to say, because we're using this tool or this set of tools, these interconnect and go bump, 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 right? And things are well connected, except for this exception. But you might be able to then describe, so this is, I'm thinking not just in the textual language of the control, but starting to get into code and architecture. You can describe at one level down, closer to what the implementation is, but higher than the implementation. And you can start analyzing that for the gaps. To say, here's the fabric, we have 30 controls, 50 controls, whatever it is. We have these things that are well integrated. We have a lot of manual processes that go on here. These things are well integrated, managed by another team over there. You can start doing a systematic understanding of how the controls interact and the flow of data between them and so forth.
100%. Sounds like you should come to the next session.
I absolutely agree. They feed into each other, they overlap, they're layered, and it can get very complicated very quickly, which is partly why I think we need to make sure we define the risks we are addressing with each of the implementations and with each of the controls that are defined. Because we may find that we're duplicating ourselves, or we're not providing additional value with the extra layers, or, like you say, there can always be multiple paths. So one of the areas that we got sort of tied in and not on the second workshop was different times you could do code review. You can do that at different phases. You don't have to do that on the pull request. You could do that in bulk at a later date. So you have 2 completely different implementations there with different ways of evidencing the requirement. So yeah, we need to map those out, look for gaps, absolutely. It's a good point.
I think it's a good point there, because one of the outputs and goals of this project is the catalogue, but we're already building a bit of a meta model, some sort of data model to capture that, so we can present things nicely in the website and do that kind of stuff you're talking about. So, you know, as we discover stuff, like we might try and so.
Point taken.
Yeah, we are over time. So.
Right, I think that's
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.